Hey, friend. Welcome to another episode of the Between Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Matson, and I'm really grateful you chose to listen today. Thanks for putting in your headphones and tuning in to whatever sacred conversation might take place. You never know what you're getting when you hit play on a podcast. I hope you can find yourself inside this conversation today. Thanks for listening. I have a feeling today's conversation is going to be, I don't know, transcendent, mystical, cosmic, and yet also concrete. I think that's how Kevin Sweeney, our guest, seems to approach his understanding of God, of faith, and the big questions of life. I'm excited to introduce you, listener, to Kevin. Here's the truth. I don't really know Kevin. Kevin and I just met each other, about 30 seconds ago here on the internet screen that we logged into together. So you are, as often happens, you're invited inside a very real conversation where two human beings are trying to get to know each other and trying to see if there's something sacred in this interaction. And I hope there is. And I hope the listener can feel it and can sense it. So Kevin Sweeney, the author of several books. Let me read the titles of the first two books that are already out. And then the third book, we're going to be discussing this third book, this new book. It comes out, Kevin, is that early May? Early May it comes out?
May 6th. Yeah.
May 6th. Okay.
Yes.
All right, so 3 books. So the first book, The Making of a Mystic. The subtitle of that book is My Journey with Mushrooms, My Life as a Pastor, and Why It's Okay for Everyone to Relax.
Come on.
Yeah. Kevin, we can dive into that for a lot of different reasons. Actually, relax, even just the word relax. I was at church, I don't know, a couple months back, and somebody came up to me after church and I just was asked to give the sermon that Sunday, and it went well, and I felt real. And she came up to me and she was like, "Hey, I think you're the first person in sort of a pastor role who has ever told me it's okay to relax." And so I love that you've got a whole book about, like, it's okay to relax, man. That's a powerful spiritual piece of permission.
I agree.
Second book, The Joy of Letting Go. This new book, and I just finished this book, and we're going to dive into it pretty deep, but it's called The Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus. Subtitle of this book, Mystics, The Black Prophetic Tradition, and Why I'm Still a Christian. Kevin, welcome to the Between Podcast. You're in Honolulu, Hawaii right now. Tell us what island life is like. Are you in the cosmic array of the 37th floor of that high rise and overlooking the ocean? Or are you in the concrete jungle of the city of Honolulu? What's life like there for you, man?
I think just like the book, I'm in both simultaneously. We inhabit the cosmic through the concrete, and we inhabit the universal always through the particular and through our embodied life. Before I say something about the island life, one, super grateful to be here. Happy to be on with you. Yeah. And the listeners probably know this, but since it's the first time we met, you have such a great, I feel like a classic traditional voice for radio. You got a great, silky, it cuts through. It's so good.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's funny. I want to admit something. I'm just going to vulnerably admit something out loud. When I was probably about 26 or so, I did a lot of research on the internet about, could I be a voice actor? Like what does it take to become a voice actor?
I'm telling you, dude. Yeah, I mean, if this was the 60s and 70s, you'd be killing it with the old school microphones. 90s, you'd be like a radio host. But now podcast is a great medium for that.
Yeah, this is what I do. Yeah, that's right.
Island Hawaii is, I grew up in Los Angeles originally, and I moved here at 18. And I've essentially stayed here. I'm 40 years old. And island life Hawaii is a very, very special place. It is a very special place to feel welcomed into when you're a transplant and you're not from here, especially as what we call haole people, white people out here. To be embraced here by the island through the people. That's how I experience it. The island reaches her arms out to embrace you through the people here. And through friendships and relationships with people who are from here, but also very Hawaiian people who are here with my wife and I the past 13 years or so since we moved back for good. It's a special thing. There's many moments I have here where I'm like, this is only in Hawaii. And I'm so grateful, whether it's the structure of a wedding, because it's a Samoan and a Filipino person getting married and the rituals they have, or being in an area where I'm like, this is not a place tourists would ever know exists. But here I am with these people who have so many generations going back historically to ancient Hawaii. And I'm like, for me to be here and to just be a part of it is special. And I'm 2 blocks from the water. I surf. My wife surfs. My kids have probably spent more time in the water. They're 6 and 8 at this point in their life than most people have their entire life. So I just think, yeah, being here is special. There's a lot more struggle day to day economically. There's a lot more harsh realities than people are aware of. But when you embrace all of that together, it's my favorite place in the world. So it's great, man. I love it.
I can't help but comment on the metaphor of being welcomed by the island through the people, right? Like through the embrace of the people. That to me feels like a theological statement, right? There is something about being connected with God through the medium of sacred moments of human connection.
Absolutely.
That between, I mean, that's what our project Between is all about. Is that ability to connect with the divine through the very personal, very intimate next person you encounter, if you choose to encounter it fully. I also, to be in a place, I mean, I grew up in Midwest United States, and the level of day-to-day contact I have had in my life with native peoples, with people who have been on a land and connected to a land for generations and generations and generations, who are a part of history, but not like a chapter in a history book, like are deeply rooted in the land. Hawaii, you and I could do a different show about colonization and why I haven't had that interaction, but man, for you to even just voice real quickly on a little introduction, like your ability to tune into that and appreciate it and honor it, that's a beautiful thing that is worth commenting on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a cool place, man. I really love it a lot. There's a well-known Hawaiian waterman out here named Brian Kealana. We call him Uncle Brian. His family has deep roots on the west side here, surf, water, not just going back, but he's really involved in Hollywood production out here, and water safety. When people come and do shows, he's like the head of he's the guy basically, right? And when he does interviews and when he talks to people, he says, something like, most people think we're disconnected by land, but really we're all connected by water on the planet. The water connects us all, so the orientation of people here still connected with the land and still oriented around the water is really special. Like surfing and diving and spearfishing and one-man canoes and outriggers, and everyone's like in the water still. And to go back to what you said about the people and the theological aspect, I take the metaphor of the body of Christ very seriously, theologically and practically in our lives. And I dare to tell people, whether it's the church or your friends or family or whoever's there present with you in solidarity through highs and lows, no matter who it is, I'm like, the Spirit doesn't just show up through those people. The Spirit shows up as those people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not just a carrier of the divine. It is an actual expression of the divine. That hand you hold next to you is the Spirit showing up as the embodied person, and that person in the same way the Spirit did through Jesus and as Jesus. So to me, that I extend that metaphor very far, of how important us embracing our role as the body of Christ is in this world. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Man, I want to get into that. That to me is that is a provocative statement for a lot of people, to suggest that the hand that I hold next to me is an expression of the divine. And it doesn't feel provocative to me. It feels so naturally true. So anyway, we can come back to that. But maybe before we get into that, before we get into the book, you were I think I read, and I think you mentioned before we started recording, you co-led a local church there in Honolulu, Imagine Church, I think it was called. the website, your website, when I was reading your bio, tells me that Imagine Church was an urban church in Honolulu that was welcoming to all people and committed to leading the church into the future. And that line struck me, and I wanted to ask about it. In a lot of these conversations that I have on this podcast, I get to talk to a lot of people who are looking forward, not just lamenting what the church has been or hasn't been, or what institutions are breaking down. But a lot of people say, yeah, sure. And also, like, there are new expressions. There are new ideas, new innovations in the way that we're gathering together faithfully. And I'm curious, I mean, leading the church into the future, this was a big chapter of your life, where, a decade where you were leading a local church. I'm always just curious to find out what about that do you still love about that chapter? What are the stories that you tell that feel forward facing, that felt connected to something in the future?
Gosh, I love that question, because my experience with our church was wonderful. Pastoring is hard. There's always wounds. There's always, challenging moments, conflicts, loss of relationships, and that stays with you. And there are difficult parts of them, even when it is good. But with integrating those into your experience, I had a great experience with the church. Like, I've never really had a bad experience with church, because I haven't been in many churches in my life also. I didn't grow up connected, and I came in later. But yeah, what stories... that is a great way to think about the things you're proud of as specific stories. And I love the concreteness of that, to go back to the theme. I'll tell you a story. There's a young woman who came to our church, didn't know her too well, and she was only coming for 3 to 4 weeks. And it was Easter, I think, in 2019. We met in a bar across the street from my house, which is very convenient. I was technically a manager of the bar and leading a church in the bar, because dreams come true in life
right.
sometimes. And, she had only come a few times. And when she comes, like, me talking to her really briefly, I'm like, okay, she identifies as queer. I don't know exactly how she would identify, but, she comes with friends. And on that Easter, we, had Easter in the bar, and we threw a huge, like, champagne brunch after. And that really came from NT Wright a long time ago. And he's like, man, Easter is a celebration. We should be eating chocolate cake and drinking. If you get what this is about, if you get what it means to be resurrection people, what it means for new creation, like, I always loved that. So I was like, one day we're going to throw a huge champagne thing. And we did. And it was probably one of my proudest moments, because I'm like, we're breaking fire. It's a Sunday morning. We're totally breaking fire code. And Hawaii's less, like, concerned about, like, the red tape. It's just different. It's a lot more relational. I'm like, there's 140 people in a bar that's like 80-person max, like fire hazard. There's people, like, probably behind the bar. I'm like, this is so illegal what we're doing. Then afterwards, it, like, spilling out onto the streets. Like, people are drinking on the streets, right there. Like, champagne's being passed out. There's audio in my building right now. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Our elevator was broken this morning, the first time ever. I had to go down 37 flights of stairs and up 37 flights of stairs this morning because our elevator. So you might want to edit this audio out, just because they're basically telling us it's working again.
Well, that's good. Your elevator's working. That's great news.
It's over. You're in the real life. You're really in the concreteness.
We are not editing that out at all. That was as concrete as it gets. That's real.
That was. We all have speakers, and they let us know. So, like, the parties spilling out onto the streets, people are drinking champagne, like, on the sidewalk. People who I know we didn't even, like, assign probably to do it are just, like, handing out trays of champagne. I was like, this could all go so bad, but you know what? We just got to ride it out. And so that was, a wonderful experience. But from that, my wife, who's very powerful speaker, sort of in the moment, reads the moment, very intuitive with all that, did some version of, our church didn't really do altar calls, but some opportunity to say yes, right, to God, yes to the way of Jesus. So this young woman did, and I think the next weekend or so, we're going to do some baptisms. And on that day, like, our church is there on the beach, and her friends who I've never met are there. And, like, her identifying as queer, like, obviously there's a long, struggling, conflicted relationship because of how the church has treated LGBTQ people there. But not only that day did she get baptized, but it was the first time she ever came out publicly. So I'm like, when she comes out publicly, it's to the church. She comes out publicly because she saw this space as a safe enough space to say, this is an essential part of who I am. It's not everything, but it's an essential part of who I am, in the same breath as I'm making this commitment to the way of Jesus. So when I come out of those waters, it is out of the fullness of who I am while I'm in process, in the presence of my friends and family and a church who I now see as safe enough to do this. That is an example of a story where I'm like, this is what Imagine is.
Yeah.
This right now is when church makes sense to me. We were independent. I wasn't a part of a larger denominational thing. I could have, done that. But I made decisions to not be fully dependent upon the finances of the church so I could be the fullness of who I am and make decisions that I thought were faithful to the vision of the church and not something that was based out of fear of whether or not we can pay the rent. There's a lot of struggle that comes with that financially, but I probably value like creative freedom and integrity and pastoral freedom over everything, when it comes to leading. So I was willing to do that. So yeah, that's just one example of something I was very proud of. And, I think one of the things that just defined Imagine was like its structural minimalism. Like I'm very minimalist when it comes to structure and when it comes to systems. Like I try to create an environment that is organic as possible. It needs structure, it needs rituals, it needs systems, but just enough to allow that which wants to grow organically to thrive without impinging too much on it. That was a big part of the approach as well.
Man, that the story about the party in the bar. I love that you connected A to B there. You connected that young woman's like feeling of fullness in herself, right? You connected that with the champagne brunch, like when there was a moment of radical welcome, not radical welcome because there was a mission statement or a page of your website that said, but like a feeling of we are here celebrating each other right now. We are just fully here. Everybody here. This is what welcome feels like. Have another glass of champagne on the sidewalk. There is something, I connect those two things very clearly. That is a beautiful moment that is more than just a party, more than just a champagne brunch. That's it. That's the coming to life of what you
to
believed.
me, that's an embodied realization and feel of a lot of the parables Jesus told about parties and who's invited and who's not.
Yeah, man.
And sometimes when it gets so obvious, I'm like, every parable is everybody who you think is in is out, and everybody you think is out is in. And those who you think who are in or who are out is not because God's making them be out. It's because of them in their own decisions to close the door and keeping others out is actually keeping them out. They're closing the door to keep others out, and in the process, they're actually removing themselves from the party. And to me, I'm like, that's everywhere. And the welcome and embrace of people, and to embrace people where they are and to invite them into the future without any shame or coercion of they're supposed to be anywhere other than where they are on anybody's timeline. Now you've created an environment that does not guarantee, but creates the best conditions for actual growth. Because it's always, I tell people, the kingdom of God is always an invitation. It's never an obligation. This is an imagine. Jesus imagines this other way. You want to come? Great. If not, that's fine. You can stay there for 5 years, and then one day when you hit rock bottom and wake up and something happens, you might be ready to begin. Hey, let's do that. The pastor who can't handle people not being where they think they're supposed to be, whether it's based on beliefs or morality, that's not about them. That's about the pastor's own issues, always, and the freedom to let other people be where they are, to invite them forward and let them go at their own pace. I'm like, that is what the Spirit perpetually does for every single one of us. And we have the chance to do that for others. What a gift we have as guides, friends, and pastors.
It's like on our website in our little 4 community agreements, and a simple statement that I actually stole from the senior pastor at my local church. But he would often say, everyone is welcome here. The only people who aren't welcome here are people who can't welcome everybody. And that feels like okay, yeah, that's cute. But but there's something about it that is related to what you just said. Like that is just an invitation. Everybody's welcome here, except for the people who can't welcome everybody, because those people aren't ready. Like they're making a choice. They've, to your point, they've excluded themselves. They've said no.
Exactly.
That's not this. Clearly, this place isn't right for me, and that's okay. I'm happy to acknowledge that
Exactly.
this you're not ready for this. That's okay.
Totally.
But we're doing something different. This is the invitation. If you can see everybody you encounter as magnificent, if you can see everybody you encounter as an expression of the divine, and really believe that, and that's hard. Maybe even if you can try, not you don't even have, because it's really hard to believe that all the time and to act like you believe it all the time. It's really hard to do. But if you're invited to try, and I think that's the invitation, right? That's
Yeah, I
right.
like that. Yeah.
Kevin, I want to get into your book. Here's what I experienced reading Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus. So I wrote a few bullet points, and I'm going to read them out loud because I was just trying to reflect on what was it that I loved about this book. So here's what I wrote. I wrote, this book gives permission to those who feel imprisoned within or sealed outside of dusty old rules-based religious institutions. This book gives permission. I wrote, this book speaks to this exact moment by borrowing the language and stories of 2,000 years ago, paired with the wisdom of modern, bold, brave Black prophets of contemporary history. I wrote that this book pulls up a comfortable chair in the part of the Venn diagram of God that our hyper literal society wants to avoid. And I wrote that this book pours a cool glass of clear living water to quench our collective thirst brought on by the friction of the false faith binaries we've all had ground into our skulls. Anyway, that was my reflection.
You should have wrote the foreword.
Yeah, that's the review I'll put on Amazon or whatever. Yeah, heck yeah.
Please do.
But there's a reason you wrote this book, and I want to know. I think I want to start there. Like, what's the story about what churned this book out of your soul? Where did this book come from?
Yeah, it was probably around the time you said you visited out here. So we actually closed our church down. We announced in January of 2022, then we closed down in like May of 2022. And so I think it was probably a little bit before that, maybe. I was walking at a park right across the street from my house, right near the water. And this thought came to me, and it just said, yeah, I want to write a book about Jesus. Because I'm like, after this spontaneous awakening moment with God when I was 18, as my journeys continued, I'm like, I've read all the books that will make someone question their beliefs about God and Jesus or any role in the Christian tradition. I've wrestled existentially with the radical contingency of everything to the point where you can't hold on to anything with certainty. I've gone through the critiques. I've gone through different stages of orientation and changed my beliefs, and they've evolved so many times. And yet I'm still just as committed to this path as I've ever been. And I'm still comfortable calling myself a Christian. Why is that? Why does that feel natural and good to me in a time where many people, for legitimate reasons, have a hard time saying that, identifying with that, holding on to beliefs about God? So that was the catalyst of just like, what do I really think? How do I hold this together? Because I don't have conventional beliefs about a lot of things. I'm not a Christian in the same way other people would consider themselves to be Christians, where it's a belief-based Christianity where you can assent to these 5 things, or here's your doctrines or dogmas. Why does this feel so natural for me to do that? So I think that was the catalyst of like, well, I really want to work that out. I know it intuitively and I embody it, but I've never actually taken the time to think about it in a way that organizes it into a whole. And so that was the catalyst. And correct me if you think this is off, but I've noticed something about how I write compared to what I read most of the time, from, let's say, in religious sort of settings. And I say, most people, it feels like to me, most people write what they are learning, and I write what I've become. So most of the time, people are writing or podcasting or thinking and talking with their friends about whatever is at the growing edge. Because if you're on a path, you're focused on whatever's in front of you. You know, if you're whacking weeds and you have to climb over a tree, if you're on a literal path, that's what you're talking about. Man, what is this tree? We're figuring it out. We're getting through it. So now we're talking about it. That's natural. That's normal. I'm a person who doesn't always talk when I first see things. I'm an Enneagram 5. I am naturally in my head. I like to gather large amounts of information. So that's not my personality. So part of it's just that. But I'm like, I will talk about things later on when I have become it enough and integrated it enough where I'm not just starting to throw things out there, but I feel comfortable because of the role it has in my life and how I've directly realized it for myself. So this book is like, this is how my life actually works. This is how my faith in Jesus, this is why I can still be a Christian. Because while most people have a belief-based Christianity, I'm a Christian because I believe this, and this. For me, from the very beginning, my faith was not based on beliefs about God. It was based on direct experience of God. Mm-hmm. That has carried me through. That still remains with me to this day. My faith was not, here's the container I believe in that holds the substance. It was actually the experience of the substance itself. So the container and the form can morph and change and evolve or die or grow or whatever it needs to, because the point is the actual substance, the presence of the cosmic Christ who is loving and sustaining all things at all times. And then the actual concrete way of Jesus who is inviting us into a very particular mode of being. So that was a fascinating discovery for me when I wrote this book, was me saying, oh, you can be fully committed to the way of Jesus regardless of your religious beliefs. Because
man, I love that.
You don't need, like, dogma does not qualify you or disqualify you from love. Doctrine does not determine the depth of your experience of being known by God. And the interesting thing is holding abstract beliefs about Jesus, like the creed is very abstract. It doesn't mean it's bad, but the creed is an abstract thing. I believe in like the Trinity in some form of this, and these are all abstract beliefs that have nothing to do with the life of Jesus. Holding abstract beliefs about God are not required to follow Jesus. So anybody, anywhere, at any time can wake up to the realization that unconditional love is the defining force of this universe, and that will change you. Anywhere, no matter what your religious orientation, no matter what your beliefs are, if you touch that, even for 5 seconds in a worship service, in the water, walking through a forest, sitting down with a friend I don't care what it is. If you touch that, it will change you. And that is an experience of love and of God. And then when it comes to the concreteness, anybody can offer compassion. Anybody can be in solidarity with the poor. You don't need to say, well, wait, hold up. Let me just let you know I believe all these things you're supposed to believe at this church. And now that I do that, I can say I'm following Jesus with the poor. No, you're always following Jesus whenever you're actually identifying with the marginalized and the poor. So I think for me, it's a movement from faith is about the beliefs you hold to faith is about direct experience of God and an embodied commitment to a particular way of life you see in and through Jesus. And so I tell people, I'm not trying to completely devalue beliefs, but I am trying to dethrone them in our lives. They're important, but not the way we think, not as important as we think, and they don't have the role we think they do.
I feel like you just preached a sermon that is the exact sermon that everybody who identifies as spiritual but not religious, or who says I'm a spiritual nun, N-O-N-E, who says church isn't for me, like none of that, the creeds don't make sense to me, but I've touched unconditional love and I've felt its truth. And I don't know what language, what metaphors work for me to make sense of it. And the words unconditional love aren't enough. I know there's something more deeper and higher but I've felt that. And the moment I think you're preaching a sermon that I just deeply resonate with, that this is part of why, for the work of Between, why this project is so centered on uncertainty, because I want to enter into that dialogue with people. I want people to have permission to enter into that dialogue with everybody they encounter, because we're all just swimming around trying to grab onto that rod of unconditional love, and trying to figure out the right name for it, and trying to figure out the right thing to do with it, and trying to figure out what it's propelling us to do in our unique individual lives.
Yeah, I tell a story in the intro to my first book, The Making of a Mystic, which captures a lot of, I think, what we're talking about and how I orient myself in the world. And I was like 24. My wife and I were living in Orange County, California at the time after we got married. And I was going on this nighttime walk, and it wasn't a walk to anywhere. It was just a contemplative walk, silence and solitude. Silence is my main practice. Sometimes I will do contemplative walks as well. So I'm not really going anywhere. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just present. And when I was on this walk, this like diatribe type of thing happened in my head. And I said, it's one of those moments where you just know. Then another voice says, know what? And the first voice says, I don't know, but you just do. That to me captures the mystical and experiential mode of knowing, or the religious mode of knowing, that says, for the mystic, for the person who has direct experience of God and their faith is grounded in experience, for the mystic, knowing God is not primarily knowing something about God, it's being known by God. It's not primarily about seeing, it is about the actual dismantling and liberating experience of being seen. It's not about loving God, it's about being loved by God. I don't even know what that means to love God, except to love the people around you. Like, you can't, I write that in my book. I'm like, you can't love God. Like, how are you going to love God like the way we normally think about it? You're going to give him a hug, you're going to wrap your arms around her, and I say, I love you, give her some words of affirmation, depending on her love language or whatever. No, to love God is primarily to be loved by God. And then to love God is to love God in the face of everybody else, especially those on the edges. And so, for the mystic, when you talk about uncertainty, the mystic says, oh, I already know. You say, you know what? You're like, I'm not sure. Because now we're back to the cognitive. Now we're back to the rational mode of knowing as a form of mastery and understanding. The mystic says, no, I can't describe a perfect shape of God, but I can tell you the experience of what happens when you're loved by that God. So it's a being known. And that actually, I think that's more difficult for people, because knowing in a Western rational sense gives you a sense of control. It keeps you in the power seat. It makes you have knowledge. The mystic, to be known, man, is to be vulnerable. To be known is to be open. To be known is to embrace the uncertainty of not knowing, while being cared for so deeply that you don't need to know in the way you thought you did. So the mystic invites us into a different mode of knowing. And again, that's where a lot of the freedom comes from, and the hope of, to me, a book like this is not, you don't go on the same path as me, but for all those people who have had glimpses of that wondrous experience and are wondering, what does it mean to contribute and work for good and the common good and caring for others in this world? But I don't know. I can't just say I believe in all these things in the creeds yet, or I don't know what I think about this, and I'm rethinking everything. Part of me is like, it doesn't matter. And the church is the beautiful space, I think, that can hold together the uncertainty of people in the midst of this broader embodied experience that we have of God in and through and as each other, and a commitment to the world. So because if your church goes and does something for the poor, I can see my neighborhood from here, basically. If you're doing something for the poor and you're caring for the marginalized, we don't have to ask members of your community to pass a doctrinal exam to care for those people. It doesn't matter. They're already doing it. They're doing the Christ journey. Why would we go back and talk about what we think? No, we're doing it. The movement has always been, from into flesh. Like, the word became flesh. So when it becomes flesh, this other conversation is peripheral. What you think is essential to me is peripheral now, because we're doing the journey, and everybody can do that no matter what they think in any moment. And I find that to be extremely hopeful for people who aren't sure what they think. I'm like, who cares? Yes. Can you let yourself be loved and seen? We're doing the journey. You want to commit to show up for others and see them? This is the journey. who cares?
Yes.
That's what I want to invite people into.
I feel like I have to believe, because I just finished reading this book, I have to believe that that specific point of view that you just shared is informed by. Uh, I know you've dove pretty deeply into the Black liberation theology tradition and the Black Christian Church and the way that it's shown up primarily through embodied work, primarily by
Exactly.
being so close to the ground
Exactly.
for good reason. But I want I want to hear. I'm actually curious. Like I want to learn from you about what you've learned by looking at the world through that lens and how that has shaped your personal understanding of of the story and the experience of Christ. I think
Mm,
anyway. Will you lean
yeah.
into some of those lessons that come
Yeah.
from that Black liberation theology
Yeah,
tradition?
that's one of the many connecting points between the mystics and then the Black prophetic tradition or liberation theologians is to simplify them for the sake of a point. The mystics are saying this is about direct experience, embodied in your own heart and mind with your body as the ultimate source of revelation, which we have to dare to believe it can be that, which I think you see in Jesus as well. The mystics say it's direct knowing in your own embodied existence. The Black prophetic tradition says, and in our social concreteness of our lives, what matters is the embodied direct work for liberation and justice. This is what matters. And both of them are embodied, and they do not completely neglect doctrine, but it isn't the focus of either one of those things. It just isn't. And the Black prophetic tradition, I'll tell people there is a concrete and liberating Jesus that has been proclaimed by the Black prophetic Christian tradition in the United States that has grounded my faith for, I don't know, let's say 15 years. Like, this is what has shaped my understanding of the concreteness of Jesus, right? This is an earthy and embodied Jesus whose ministry is defined by his identification with the marginalized and his solidarity with the oppressed. And I get that from Kelly Brown Douglas in her book, The Black Christ and What's Faith Got to Do with It. Right? This is a socially engaged Jesus who, think about this, who laughed at the power of empire, who told stories about the impotence of status and wealth, and who confronted an entire, predatory economic system with the flip of a table. Like, this is not the abstract white Jesus of the creeds that only asks you to believe certain things about him. This is an earthy and embodied and radical Jesus who dares and invites you to follow him, to love other people in a way that disrupts systems and structures. That's why I say, like, the gospel is not just about lifting up broken hearts, it's about tearing down broken systems. And this Jesus is the one who shows us what that looks like in his time, and then empowers us and calls us to do that same type of work in our time. So when you talked about the concreteness, like, James Cone is probably the most famous Black theologian there's ever been. He really got Black theology going as an academic discourse with his book, Black Theology and Black Power, written in 68 or 69. But he says, God was the God of history, the liberator of the oppressed from bondage, because of course they're going back to Egypt as well on this whole trajectory of liberation. He says Jesus was not an abstract word of God, right? It's not an abstract word you just say, I believe in. I believe this. That's great. No, he says Jesus was not an abstract word of God, but God's word made flesh who came to set the prisoner free, right? So this is a concrete Jesus who had his feet on the ground, his heart with the oppressed, and his eyes fixed on structures and systems that were getting in the way of life. This is a Jesus who does, like, this Jesus invites us to not just believe in, but to live out dimensions of the gospel that I believe the abstract white Jesus who only wants you to believe things about him does not help you see and does not require you or invite you to do with your own life. So I think whether you get it from the Black prophetic tradition, from other liberation theologies, but it is voices from the edges and the margins, it is the voices of the oppressed who have been in need of liberation that are the ones that help us see the centrality of liberation in the life of Jesus.
Man, once you start to look at, I hadn't had a lot of exposure to Black liberation theology, to liberation theology in general, to queer theology. I hadn't had a lot of exposure to it. I don't think that's good or bad. That's just a fact of my life journey. And then probably like a lot of white dudes like me who maybe earnestly engages in some of those traditions, some of the wisdom coming from the margins. It's like, what, how was I not seeing through this lens before? How it's so difficult to confront the fact that I was empire. Like it is so, and what a wonderful confrontation. Of course it's difficult. Of course it is. But man, once you start to see the life of Jesus through even a little bit of that lens, if you put those glasses on every once in a while, it just changes the whole story. It changes the entire way you see every person you encounter, every conversation you have, the next person you see in the aisle of the grocery store or have a coffee meeting with, or see while you're walking down the street and they're rearranging,
and every news story and every press
yes,
briefing and every history book and all these things. Yeah, I'm with you.
yes, yeah. I want to read a little section of the book, because I said earlier I felt like a real permission being offered from the book. So you wrote this: the revolutionary spark of our faith cannot be reduced down to beliefs and ideas we carry with us in our rational minds. Faith is alive in our bones, awakened in the center of the heart, and naturally moves through and as our bodies. This feels like a welcome mat to the mind of a mystic. And you've talked about this already, but I just feel like there's a lot of people, maybe I'm one of them, who not often enough have been given permission to trust the experience of God that my own body has. Because I didn't know that was something I could do. I didn't know that was a channel my body tuned into. Like nobody told me that before. And so I can't help but I wanted to read that passage. Faith is alive in our bones, awakened in the center of our heart, naturally moves through and as our bodies. Will you talk about how you understand each person's maybe agency to know God and feel faith deeply and personally?
There is only one medium that you have for this life, and it's your own body.
Yeah.
It's your own life. You don't have anything else. We don't have another option. There is only way to interface with others and with God and with the world, and it's through our bodies. And I think I've learned a lot by having friendships with people who grew up in the church, because I didn't really. I went to Catholic school as a kid and I stopped going, and it was just kind of, I tell people I grew up with a pleasant indifference to religion.
Yeah.
I didn't have any religious shame or guilt. I was never told not to trust my body. I wasn't told to trust it, but I didn't have that. So from the very beginning, the most important compass I had spiritually was my own experience and what I saw. Because when you don't have any, as you can imagine, if you don't have youth groups and you don't have pastors and mentors and you don't have guides, and you sense you're going through this big existential crisis and you're asking the deepest questions, and then you have a direct experience of God, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot to take on. But I was just like, I know what I saw. I know what I experienced, because this doesn't make any sense, So I think I would invite people in the book. I say, can you dare to see and experience your body as the sacred text that it is? Even before this book, I remember having these thoughts. I might have written them in one of my books, but I'm like, a lot of pastors might be good at reading the Bible, but they're not good at reading their own hearts.
Mm.
And a lot of religious leaders might be good at interacting with sacred texts, but they're not good at interacting with the sacred texts of their own lives. Can you listen? Like Parker Palmer says, can you listen to your own life? Do you know what's like? Do you know why your body's irritated right now? Do you know why you're frustrated? Do you know why in this season you're feeling more fatigued? Like, this is about reading the sacred text of your own unfolding journey. And there's a lot of things I'm not good at when it comes to leading, like organizational leadership. I'm a nightmare. Like, I was 6 years into the church and I'd be Googling, like, what do I do in a meeting? Right before a meeting, I'm supposed to leave. And I had friends who would help me with that, people who were much better at that. I'm grateful for that. But the other part about reading your own life, paying attention, learning how to rest, some afternoons as a pastor, I'm like, you know what? The most important thing for me to do is sit here, look at the window, and just be like, oh yeah, that interaction with that person, that actually like really hurt me. Oh yeah, and sometimes that's a hard thing to accept is you're going to love people and sometimes unbeknownst to them, they're going to say hurtful things. Oh yeah, that's tough. I'm going to sit here and maybe my eyes will well up with tears as I accept once again, we live in an imperfect world and this is where I lead and I have to forgive that person and forgive life. And now I can sit here and for that hour, just sit in silence, listen to my body, grieve over it, be like, all right, and now we keep going.
Mm.
But if I stuff that down for 7 years, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That to me is a great art and it's so nuanced. And that's the gift. One of the great gifts of silence is learning to hear your own voice, learning to listen to your body as the source of wisdom that it is. If Jesus's body was the ultimate medium for spirit, maybe ours is too. I learned how to read the sacred texts of my own heart. I developed the ability to listen to the Spirit of God within me from the beginning. It's like you cultivate these interior instruments that enable you to tune in to how the cosmic story is being written through and as your own life, because you have your own unfolding. I tell people, well, my body is a sacred text and so is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think further along the journey, learning to read that and trust it and know it is so essential for the second half of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Man, the often when I talk about the space between us is sacred, that seems like a tagline that goes on the front of our website, and in fact it is. But for me, I'm trying to communicate what you just communicated much better than I've ever been able to, which is that the story in any conversation, in any interaction, the story that you hear is the same story that is written in the ancient texts. It's the same story. If you listen close enough, it's the same story. And it is as much a sacred text as the Bible, as any other sacred text. Like it is, but that is about choosing to tune in, choosing to listen, choosing to believe that it might be sacred. And the moment you choose to see it as such, meaning reveals itself. And I would argue the divine reveals itself right there in the midst of that conversation through the experience of our own bodies. All right, Kevin, this is, there's 1,000 other things I want to talk to you about. There were 2 other giant questions I wanted to ask that really we may put on part 2. One was about, as Jesus wept going into Jerusalem, weeping for his nation. I can't help but think about how relevant it is and how much I feel I might be weeping for my nation right now. Maybe our listeners should just go read the book and consider that part. I also wanted to talk about, all of this as it directly relates to interactions. And we played in that ballpark, but there's so much more to explore. I loved this book, Kevin. I absolutely loved it. I'm deeply grateful that you put this art into the world and that you shared this fully. I know your website is, what is it? KevinSweeneyNow.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that where people find your stuff? Is that the right place for people to go?
KevinSweeneyNow.com is great to just kind of see where I'm at as a whole. I'm probably most active on Instagram at Kevin Sweeney Now. So those are probably the best places. If you hear this, the book is up for pre-order already. So whether they hear this before or after, it's either pre-order or it's up. So Amazon.com is probably the best place to get it. You know, for me as an author, it's also available on Barnes and Noble too. I'm not sure if it's on Target. One of my other books was. I'm not sure how that works, but yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble is great. So yeah, I'm honestly like it took me a long time to write this because of my season of life, but I'm super proud of it. And I'm like, yeah, this is how I really hold this together. This is what my life feels like. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. I
No, I
appreciate it, Kevin.
appreciate you, man. This is so good.
Hey, to the listeners out there, thanks for listening to another episode of the Between Podcast. Hey, you can find all our stuff at between.church. I don't have to give you a sales pitch, but if you want to engage deeper with Between, we've got groups. You can engage in our sacred text little mini ministry. We've got, follow along with all the stuff that we're producing every single week. And man, a bunch of other cool podcast episodes, but this was a fantastic one, Kevin. Thanks so much for being a guest. I appreciate
you,
it, man.
This is great.
All right.